To discuss the economic impact of a tax of this nature on the N3, we're joined by Economist Dawie Roodt and the Road Freight Association's Gavin Kelly. A very good afternoon to you both, Gavin, and I'm going to start with you. The industry has faced many headwinds, the increasing price of fuel and a whole lot of infrastructure issues that the trucks have battled with, not to mention the protests along the employment of foreign nationals in the space. What does an attack of this nature do to the industry already dealing with so many issues?
Good evening, Rafil, and good evening, Dawie. Good evening to all the viewers. Well, the first thing that it does is it puts those companies who are struggling to stay alive, struggling to make ends meet, and that's because they've got tight schedules. They need to meet sailings of ships. They need to meet deadlines in terms of delivery or pickups. It puts them at risk because now they will stand on this route for a couple of hours, if not a day or 2 days, depending on what happens. The road is now open and the trucks are starting to flow, but there's a huge backlog. So that's the first thing it does. It places huge pressure on their schedules, their timings, and the sailings. The second thing it does is it brings once again to the fore this fear about operating on this route. So now you're going to think about, where do I apply my business? Should I apply my business here if there's no safety, if there's no guarantee of safety? And then finally, those who move the goods through South Africa or into South Africa are going to say, no, this has been happening on and off continually for the last 6 to 7 years. It's time to move. And that's what they are doing. They're moving to other ports in Africa.
And that is the big problem, isn't it, Dawie, in that the economic implications are dire. And it brings into question the intelligence system in South Africa not being efficient enough to see or get word of incidents of this nature before they happen. We saw what happened in 2021 with the July unrest. It would appear those intelligence facilities or systems were not ramped up to make sure that we know what's happening when it happens. And in the meantime, the economy falls into a place that seemingly it cannot get out of.
Good evening to everybody. Yeah, I'm afraid there's a couple of issues that have been touched upon, but I've got more questions than anything else. You just pointed out one, and that's a question about intelligence. So why is it that the police in South Africa is simply not capable of handling these kind of situations? They don't seem to be able to handle these kind of situations. There was mentioned about some labor issues as well, and I guess there could be some labor issues as well. But I guess more importantly is why are all those trucks on the road? That freight is supposed to be on trains somewhere. And the reason why it's not on trains is simply because of mismanagement and, I would guess, incompetence and quite often corruption. So I guess all fingers are pointing to in one direction here, and that's the government that's simply not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And the impact on the economy is already quite significant. We know that we have inflationary issues in South Africa, and I'm afraid these kind of disruptions is simply going to add to the inflationary issues in South Africa. Not only that, we are sending out a message to the rest of the world and to South African potential investors that South Africa is not a nice place to do business. Traffic doesn't work properly, the police doesn't work properly, the trains don't work properly. So if you want to invest in South Africa, you really have to think twice before you do that. And in the process, what's going to happen, the South African economy is going to suffer, and it will be especially the poor that will be faced by things like, for example, high prices and the like.
So, Dawie, with that said, would it indicate that in the medium term, South Africa, as has been speculated by many economists like yourself and other related stakeholders, that we're unlikely to grow beyond 0.1% on an annual basis?
Well, if we see 0.1%, I guess we could consider ourselves to be lucky. I've done some calculations, and it seems to me that the economy is probably going to hover around about 0% for this year and next year as well. There could be a bit of a spike here and there. Sometimes we get a little bit of electricity, for example. But I'm afraid we are stuck in a growth trajectory that is well below population growth in South Africa. And we're going to stay there until we make some significant changes. And the most important change is we have to do something about the efficiency of the state. The state is failing us here. The railroads are not working. Security is not working in South Africa. And many other things. We need to fix that before the South African economy is growing. And this is only one example of that.
And of course, Gavin, the transportation of goods across the country by trucks is part of the very bedrock of a growing economy. And if they are not able to perform as they should be, then of course it's an industry that is in deep trouble. Do you think that there's enough support that does come through from government when it comes to the trucking, logistics or freight industry, and really the kind of interventions that you'd like to see from government in particular?
Well, Rafiwa, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of what it's going to do for the economy at large. So 80% of goods that move along the land move by road. There isn't really a railway system to speak of. It's here and splutterings here and there. And that's a huge amount to be carried. And if that gets attacked, then we're going to have a problem in ensuring that the economy can keep rolling, that businesses can keep operating, that there's development, that there's any sort of growth, not just retreat in terms of growth or economy. I mean, this little piece now would have cost anywhere between 3 to 10 million to start off with, just in terms of those capital assets that were hit. And who knows what sort of other ramifications and roll effects there are going to be. But the reality is, how do we deal with this? This has been on the table. If this is about foreign individuals, and I didn't pick up what the Minister of Police was saying earlier, or the President, unfortunately, but I think I got the gist was that there's a breakaway group. We've been trying to deal with this for 5 years. 5 years! And it's been around a little bit longer than that, but there's 5 years. How come can we not fix simple things like, if you don't have a work permit or whatever permit that you might need to work in this country, how do we allow employers to continue to employ those people, to create these sorts of issues? So there's going to be some sort of finger pointing, I'm sure, between various departments. There isn't much the Department of Transport can do, because the Department of Transport doesn't manage or look after the types of people who are employed in terms of foreign work permits. That is Department of Labor. And we've been saying we need to tighten that up in the first instance to make sure employers are all inspected as required. Not just the ones we know about, not just the members of the RFA, all of those members who are participating in the road freight sector.
And of course, I just have to have you give us an update. You did raise some concerns about the extension of the ZEP and the implications that that could have on the industry. If you could just weigh in on that, please, Gavin.
Well, that ship has sailed because the extension was done at the end of June, and we'd raised concerns then that we were worried that the various parties, and we don't know who caused this now. It's now being rumored that it's a breakaway part of the Truckers Forum, or the ATDF-SA. We had raised concerns that if this was extended, we'd see the return of this sort of violence, and so it has come to roost. We've also had a constitutional court ruling in terms of the constitutionality of having people working in the country with various permits. The bottom line is this: we need to tighten up the process that we use to issue visas to make sure the right people get the right visas. And secondly, we need to do those employee investigations. And this isn't only in the road freight industry. The hospitality industry is notorious for their type of foreign employees.
Dawie, I just want you to weigh in on that. This issue that we have in our various departmental systems, you've indicated they are unable to fix it on their own as government, as we've seen for over a decade now. But surely there are some low-hanging fruits, Dawie, that can be reached for by government institutions to try and form some kind of restoration, or are they no longer in any low-hanging fruits given the current state of affairs?
Yeah, I listened to Gavin and some of his remarks, and some of that I agree with, not all of it. Personally, I believe that we should allow foreigners to come into South Africa much easier, and to, of course, it has to go through a proper bureaucratic process. And I think that's where the problem is that the administration on the side of government is lacking. We need to fix that. But in principle, I think we should actually welcome foreigners to come to South Africa to apply their trades in South Africa. It's completely incorrect to say that foreigners are taking jobs away from South Africans. In fact, they are creating more jobs in the country. And the kind of foreigners that come to South Africa are people that actually are quite productive and actually contribute to economic growth. So I think that should be the starting point. The main issue here has to be with the administrative process that is simply lacking, and we have to implement that. The laws are there already. All we have to do is simply apply it and apply it correctly.
Yeah, Gavin, do you have any insights to highlight there based on what Dawie has observed when it comes to the employment of foreign national and policy, making it easier for them to come in? I'll give you an example. BMW earlier in the week saying they've got a visa issue with Home Affairs, and that is going to cause a huge backlog when it comes to skilled labour coming into South Africa, and that, of course, impacting the manufacturing of this electric vehicle that it recently launched. Your thoughts on what Dawie has highlighted here when it comes to the entrance of foreign nationals and their skills input and job creation in the economy?
Yeah, I don't disagree with Dawie. Maybe what I'd said he'd misunderstood, or maybe I articulated it poorly. I'm not saying we don't want the foreigners. What I'm saying is of allowing foreigners in is flawed, and that has always been the issue. And if you're going to have foreigners working in whatever industry it might be, then there needs to be a proper process of allowing them in, and the application for the visas must be sound. That hasn't been happening. That has been the core of why we are where we are. Once that gets sorted out, and perhaps this new ruling from the Constitutional Court and whatever Home Affairs is going to bring in place in terms of the ZDP or its replacement, perhaps that will resolve this area where it's so fudgy and very, very porous.
And very briefly, if you will, Gavin, we have run out of time. Have you engaged the Minister of Police on developments around this torching, or is that yet to happen with your members?
No, that's still yet to happen. We're obviously trying to garner a fair amount of information ourselves. We haven't spoken to him about this incident yesterday, but I'm sure that time will come.
Thank you very much. That is Economist Dawie Roodt and Road Freight Association's Gavin Kelly weighing in on the latest arson attack on trucks on the N3 and the economic implications on the entire economy, but also on an industry that's already struggling with many other issues.